little bit about it, but not directly. The reason marijuana works is because we have receptors in our brain that the compounds hit. I tell teens, for example, any of you here for smoking tomato leaves? And they all look at me like, what in the world are you talking about? And it's simple. There's nothing in tomato leaves that's psychoactive in our body. That's why nobody smokes tomato leaves. But we smoke tobacco leaves and we smoke marijuana leaves. Duh, there's stuff in there that affects our body. And it's going to be dose dependent, especially when it's receptor dependent for those of us that, the science background. If it's hitting a specific receptor, the more receptors you hit, the more effect you get. It's kind of, for us, literally, it's a no-brainer. It's the way science works. It's the way the body works. So yes, using it really infrequently, you're going to have less effect from it. But let's say you use it once or twice a month. How much are you using at the time that you use it? How much is it affecting you when you use it? And is that putting you or somebody else at risk? Again, for all those other things I talked about, the disinhibition, the changes in behavior, the changes in memory, are those putting you at risk? And I'll give you an example from times past where teens were smoking marijuana, put food on the stove, didn't remember about the food on the stove, house starts on fire, 6-year-old brother of one of them is asleep in a bedroom. Not supposed to be asleep, he was sick, he should be awake. Fire department shows up and they ask, is anybody in the house? They're high, they say, no, because their short-term memory doesn't work. They don't remember the 6-year-old's in the house. And a firefighter and the 6-year-old died. So, because the house collapsed as the firefighters were trying to do an assault to get into the bedroom, once the 2 teens did remember the 6-year-old was there. So any of these substances can put you at risk for bad things to happen to you, child or adult. So, like I said, I sort of stand by, alcohol should be illegal. As a doctor, I have to say that. It should. All of these substances, that's the reason we use them, is because they do have an effect on our body. But that effect, like all other drugs, whatever drug I prescribe for somebody as well, have good effects and bad effects. And you've got to think about the bad effects, not just the good effects.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, and I'd just like to second a couple of points. And one is that, like you said, these drugs affect the brain. They affect the brain in terms of reward, making us want to do it again. They affect the brain in terms of shutting down the parts of the brain that are telling you not to do something. I mean, I think Chris's story is a perfect example of he didn't want to do it, he was around it, he did it, but then after that, he knew it wasn't the right thing to do. When he's high, he tried cocaine. He never wanted to try cocaine. He was high, he was exposed to it, he tried it. It shuts down the parts of the brain that normally would tell you, stop it, stop, don't do this. So that's one thing, and that leads to what Dr. Howda was talking about in terms of the risky behavior. I mean, all drugs of abuse, alcohol included, can lower inhibitions, which leads people to have unsafe sex, leads people to drive in a car, either drive the car or ride in a car with somebody else who's been drinking or driving. Those are one-time things, one time, and you could have a fatal consequence. And the other point I'd like to make is that people are different. We all have different biology. We have different genetics, different biology. We don't know how a particular drug is going to affect you. So yeah, it might be once or twice for you, and that's it. You never smoke it again. But you could have the biology that Chris has, that it was so good that he then wanted it again and again. And you don't know when that once or twice a month is going to turn into something more.
Can you also talk about K2 and spice and what are those risks?
That opens up a whole door. Only because, for example, K2 was designed to be used in a laboratory to look at how the receptor in cultures responds to cannabinoids. It was never designed to be actually taken into somebody's body and used. So, and there's a lot of other substances that are being manufactured that are in that same vein. The intent is to get an effect in the body, and I'll just say kind of regardless of whatever the bad side effects are. And it's also something that's not easy to dose. How much K2 are you getting in whatever product you bought? Obviously a pharmacist didn't put it together, so you have no idea what the actual dose is that is in there. When a pharmacist puts together package of pills, we know, and the doctor knows exactly how much is in there. We've studied this dose works for this kind of patient with this amount, and this is how we do it. We know all that. When you're taking a substance that's been made, that's not designed to be put in the human body in the first place, that you don't know how much is actually in it at the time, and then, as we already talked about, you don't know how you're going to respond to it the first time you use it, there's a lot of danger in that. There's just a lot of unknowns. And the issue with K2 was, yes, there's obviously some receptors that are getting hit with that product. That's kind of why it was designed. But it's also hitting other stuff in the body. And that's where we saw a lot of patients that had hallucinations, psychosis, agitation. Fortunately, I think the legislation helped. It kind of got rid of it. But we did have a spate at Fairfax where we were seeing numerous teens that were coming in, actually had to be admitted to the hospital on sedatives to keep them under control, which was different than anything we'd seen before. I mean, marijuana by itself doesn't typically do that unless something else is used along the same time. So this was clearly different than just marijuana. And we're seeing the same thing with the bath salts. I think a lot of people have heard about that. They're basically amphetamines. So it's like methamphetamine and khat and all sorts of different amphetamines. Same process in the body as amphetamines, but yet the molecule is a little bit different than the ones we kind of learned as doctors and scientists. We don't know what's going to happen, and neither do the people making these necessarily care. They're selling it.
And a related question is, what kind of chemicals are in marijuana now? How is it different from what it was?
Oh.
So there are a lot of chemicals in marijuana. I think, some 400 different chemicals are in marijuana. THC is the primary psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. But there are a lot of other chemicals. If you want to talk about potency and how that's changed over time, it's from seizure data that we've seen, the potency has increased. The question really is, what does that mean? And we really don't know what that means, because we don't, like Dr. Howda said, we don't give marijuana to people and see the reaction. So we don't have the controlled studies that would show, what somebody who smoked a certain way, because people will titrate how they smoke. Some people smoke deeper, some people don't. So understanding what the consequences of that increase in potency, that's really still unknown. There's speculation, but we really don't know. Over here.
Do you mind stopping?
I have another question regarding prevention efforts, and that is one thing that's kind of been missing from the discussion that I deal with professionally, is the connection to violence and criminality, and the fact that marijuana use and drug use is not a victimless crime. I work in the State Department, and I started working back in 2008 on what was known as the Merida Initiative, and trying to help the Mexicans combat drug violence, and dealing with everything from the flow of weapons and bulk cash. And basically, we now have 60,000 people who have died in Mexico over the last 6 years as a result of our drug use. Their blood is on our hands. And I think kids are really tuned into those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of messages. Any parent who's passed down a decision that their kid didn't like knows that they have a great sense of justice. And it seems to me that part of this whole discussion here, and Chris, I really, really want to thank you for sharing this and putting yourself out here like this. From the law enforcement side of it, from the health side of it, from someone who's put their life back together, because addiction is a hell of a thing to have to deal with. I would just comment that I think it's really helpful to kind of add this element to it, that it's not a victimless crime, and that we are all part of a very serious problem. I now support programs dealing with journalists who try to report on drug cartels, who are under serious death threats, judges, prosecutors, police, and sometimes teenagers just like ours who end up in the middle of horrible, horrible violence. My colleagues who serve in the border posts on Mexico, their kids don't do drugs. It's because every single day on their way to school or to visit their parents, they see dead, dismembered bodies in the streets in places like Juarez. So anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on for so long, but I just think that's an important element that we got to start drawing into, especially in a community like Arlington where we have such diversity.
And I was handed a card that has a little add-on to that is, what are the costs of drug abuse in our society?
I do have a number, actually. It covers everything from tobacco, alcohol, and all illicit drugs. It's upward of $600 billion a year. I mean, and that includes crime costs, healthcare costs, lost productivity from people who aren't working, aren't finishing school. So the costs are exorbitant. And that doesn't include all the personal costs that we've heard about.
Hi. I wanted to say thank you so much for stepping out. That's really helpful to all the parents, hopefully. I'm a drug and alcohol tester, so I see people when they come to try to apply for a job, and they float right out because they couldn't pass the marijuana or whatever else they're taking. And one of the things I want to say to you, the other thing you need to look for, sometimes these kids look like they just woke up and their eyes are red and they have the munchies. So that's the other thing. But what I wanted to ask, have you seen any correlation in the studies between ADHD and marijuana smoking?
I can't think of one that specifically looked at ADHD as a diagnosis. There's a lot of them that have tried to look at some of the psychomotor and depressive and anxiety scales. And the impulsivity ones are probably the ones that are kind of the closest, that show there's this impulsivity with people who use marijuana. Again, we don't know which way it goes. Is it creating the impulsivity, or is it people who are impulsive are the ones who would be more likely to use marijuana? Probably based on that. Children with ADHD might be predisposed to that, but then they might be predisposed to use of other substances too for exactly the same reason. I don't think marijuana would be a specific drug that they would choose, because others would be obviously just, I think just as likely to be used, but I don't know that we actually have any data like that.
Yeah, I don't know of any data. I'm not sure which direction you're talking about, whether kids with ADHD are self-medicating with marijuana. That's what you're talking about.
That bit of slowing them down from, the hyperactivity.
Right. I haven't seen a lot of data on that, because marijuana also causes attention problems. So it's almost the opposite, that people have a hard time attending when they're using marijuana. So it would, in some cases, probably make the problem worse. The treatments for ADHD are more stimulants, and so we have seen people self-medicate with stimulants for ADHD.
Hi, this is for Chris. And Chris, I like many, I want to thank you also for sharing. And I'd like to probe a little bit further. When someone asks a question of costs, do you have any sense of costs, and not necessarily dollar figures, but impacts on your family of your use and your addiction? And also, do you know anything about the cost that it was for you to get through rehab?
Okay. For me, it was $2 a day. The county has like a sliding scale. This is Fairfax. They have a sliding scale, so I wasn't working. There's no way I was going to be working when I went into rehab. And so for a person who makes $0 a year, it's $2 a day. I don't know about people who actually make money and who actually work. But as far as costs go, at first I was spending about, maybe $5 here. I'd get with a group of friends and spend $5. We'd all spend $5 and get a bag of marijuana. And then eventually, it was like, I was buying my own bags, $40, $50 bags, and eventually I was buying, ounces and more than that. And I wasn't working. I don't know how I was getting this money. I'm pretty sure I was getting it from my dad, but and just from other people who wanted to smoke and knew that I could get it for them. But as far as the emotional costs, that's really what it came down to. Is my dad was scared for my life at the end of my drug use. How do I make up for something like that? no idea. But you know, my sister told me that she'd cry herself to sleep. You know, she knew I was a heroin addict, and you know, what could she do? She tried everything. She tried to get me committed into a mental asylum and get me locked up in any way possible. Like, she cried for joy when she heard I was in jail because she knew that I was somewhere safe. Like, how do you make up for something like that? I don't know. But, you know, I try my best today. But, you know, the emotional costs were way more. Thank you for asking that. I've been thinking about that recently. It's, that's what affects me the most today about how I treated my family.
A follow-up question to that, somebody wrote, how do you think your life would have been different if you hadn't used?
Oh, man. I don't know. I'd like to think that I'd still be playing baseball, you know, but I don't know. I couldn't answer that. I don't know. I think it worked out how it was supposed to today, but I don't know.
Are there certain sports, skateboarding, lacrosse, etc., that are more likely to be associated with drugs or alcohol?
I don't think so. I think marijuana use is kind of one of those weird drugs. It crosses all boundaries. It crosses all social, economic boundaries. It crosses all races. I don't think it is tied to anything. I think it's just the availability of it and the frequent use of it, the glorification of it in movies and TV and what kids see on a daily basis. I think it just it's there. So I don't think it's tied to any sport. I think it's just one of the problems that we have to deal with, and trying to educate through panels like this and through prevention, through programs like Second Chance, are the ways that we can get that through.
Just in relation to sports again, you know, and I think Chris's story is a perfect example, it affects coordination. You're not going to be doing sports for very long if you're using a lot, any sport.
Yeah, and I think that my dad thought there was no way that I'd be getting involved in stuff like this because I play year-round sports. He had me busy. He had me involved in these group activities, and he sort of took that and didn't feel like he didn't need to look. So I think the stereotypes of, you know, oh, this kid is doing that, so therefore he must not, he probably isn't using drugs, or he's doing that and he's probably using drugs. Like, that, I don't think the stereotypes are gonna fit. I mean, if your daughter or son wears like Bob Marley t-shirts and, like, you know what I mean, listens to a lot of reggae and Cypress Hill and a lot of marijuana smoking music, then you can maybe start to figure out something's going on here. But if it's a sport or like a group, or, you know, wears baggy clothes or something, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be an indicator. The indicator is what a couple parents were talking about before: red eyes and withdrawing. All of a sudden, a sudden group of friends disappear, and a new group of friends who also have red eyes are starting to appear. Like, that's going to be what you want to look at.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can read this one. My eyes aren't as good as they could be. What is cottonmouth, and what is worse to drink than smoke, or the opposite? Is it better to, what is worse to drink? Is it worse to drink than smoke, or is it the opposite? What is cottonmouth? Let's start there.
I have cottonmouth right now. It's dry mouth. It's like, you feel like you need to drink a lot of water because your mouth feels really sticky and dry, and it's one of the symptoms from being high. And then what was the other question?
They were just wondering, I guess, how do you get rid of it?
I have no idea. Drink a lot of water. Stop smoking weed.
Pardon? There you go.
The question was, is it better or worse to drink or smoke? I think that's where that was going.
Okay.
That's where.
It was my question.
Sorry.
Is it worse to drink and then smoke, or smoke? Like, what's worse?
Drink then smoke, or smoke then drink? Which is worse?
Are we getting tips on how to get high better? Is that what you want? I don't know.
They're both bad, don't eliminate one.
And worse together.
And this one is for Chris as well. So why are you interested in becoming a social worker?
I feel like my experience, like using my experience to help and benefit, is a good way to go about like making up for what I did, you know, to the community, my family, stuff like that. I just feel like I can be of some use there. So.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, we've got a few over here. Just a second. I'm getting my exercise this evening.
Okay. I don't want to monopolize this, but since there were no other questions, there's another issue I'd like to raise. I was a civil rights worker in Mississippi in 1964 when we were trying to get black people registered to vote, and without any success, until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. Obviously made a lot of progress since then, but I see some of that progress being undone by the racial disparities in the way drug laws in general or marijuana laws in particular are enforced. Blacks don't use marijuana at a higher rate than whites, but they are several times as likely to be arrested for it. That's true in Virginia as well as the rest of the country. There was a study that looked at the 9 largest counties in Virginia, compared the black arrest rate for marijuana to the white arrest rate. There was a disparity in each county, but the county with the biggest disparity, the county where if you were a black you would better not be smoking marijuana, was Arlington. I was really surprised by that. I thought Arlington was a very progressive place, but that's what the data showed. And maybe Officer Tomey, could you have any insight as to why that disparity would exist? The data was, I think, for 2003 to 2007, so it's possible that the situation now is different.
To be honest with you, that's the first time I'm hearing that. Like I said, marijuana is one of those, we have a zero tolerance for it. Doesn't matter what race you are or what ethnic background you are. If you have possession of it and we find it, and you're going to get charged with it, no matter what. I mean, it's just one of the things that we do. I'm not sure of any racial disparity or changes in that. I know that Arlington County Police Department strives at being it's a very diverse community that we live in, and we have absolutely no issues with that stuff here in the county. So I don't know why the data would reflect that. I know from my own personal experience, it was, like I said, it was zero tolerance. If you had it, you got charged. If I found it, if you didn't have it or you didn't, I couldn't find it, well, then you didn't get charged. So it didn't matter what race, sex, or nationality you were.
Good evening. This question's for Chris. Again, thanks for being here. And my question is, you were talking about being an anxious kid, and were you aware at the time that anxiety was part of what was motivating you possibly to take drugs? And do you still deal with anxiety now, and if so, how?
Yeah. I did not know I was anxious until I put a substance in my body that made me unanxious, and I was like, whoa, I guess I'm anxious all the time. And I do still deal with anxiety. I think it's an underlying issue of a lot of people's, at least I'll just speak from my experience, it's definitely an underlying issue of my addiction. And today I do therapy. I have a support group that I rely on, and I talk to a psychiatrist, and I sort of use like a comprehensive method of dealing with it. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm going to go in front of you really quick because we forget our phone.
Okay. The Second Chance program is a great thing in Arlington, but my question is, there are a lot of families that have teens that use or abuse marijuana, and short of the Second Chance program, what resources are available to those families to help the teens either seek treatment or some type of counseling?
Well, the great thing about Second Chance is it's not only court initiated. Parents can initiate it themselves. The forms are online on our, I believe it's on the Arlington County website. And you can actually fill out the form if you suspect your child of, smoking marijuana or having an alcohol issue. You can actually send your own child to that without any court involvement. And it would still apply for the school-related absence. It is a three-day program for the child. It usually takes place at one of our local firehouses here during the school day. And the program has it worked out with our Arlington Public Schools that it counts as an excused absence, which means doesn't show what's going on. It's just an excused absence, so it's not a knock on the student's attendance. And then they go for a parent show up for one Saturday or a Wednesday night, and then there's a booster session a couple months later. It is a very good program to do if you suspect that your child at an early stage that you suspect your child of abusing either alcohol or marijuana, to do that progressive, proactive stance and have them get treated early. That's one of the things that we noticed, that families that are proactive in talking to their kids about marijuana and alcohol, who go out, and it's kind of bad when I say it, but they go out and search their stuff. I mean, unfortunately, we give kids nowadays a lot of leeway. We don't like people searching or touching or looking through our stuff. The problem is they are hiding the stuff in plain sight. I mean, they're not using bowls or fancy,